Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. Today, we're diving into a conflict so brief, it holds the record as the shortest war in recorded history. But don't be fooled by the minutes, because what lies beneath those 38 ticks of the clock is a complex web of empire, economics, and coercion. So let's start by setting the stage. Why Zanzibar? Why here? Why then? In the late 1800s, Zanzibar wasn't just a dot off the coast of East Africa. It was a bustling hub in the Indian Ocean trade network. Picture this, dhows and steamships coming and going, carrying slaves, ivory, and spices. Clove exports alone made Zanzibar a heavyweight in the global spice trade. Whoever controlled Zanzibar didn't just control an island, they held leverage over a major artery of commerce flowing between Africa, India, and the Middle East. Now, here's where Britain enters the scene. The British Empire, driven by a cocktail of economic interest and moral posturing, saw Zanzibar as more than just a trading port. Officially, Britain claimed the moral high ground by targeting Zanzibar as part of its campaign to suppress the East African slave trade. But let's not overlook the strategic timing. This anti-slavery stance also gave Britain a justification to insert itself into Zanzibar's affairs and secure maritime trade dominance. At the same time, Germany was playing its own game. The so-called scramble for Africa had turned into a chessboard, and in 1890, a move was made, the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. Britain gave up claims to a small German island in the North Sea, Heligoland, in exchange for Germany backing off its interests in Zanzibar. It was imperial bartering, plain and simple. That same year, Britain declared Zanzibar a protectorate. That meant they didn't rule it directly, but they did expect local leaders to align with British goals, particularly economic ones. So by the turn of the century, Zanzibar wasn't just an island. It was a prize, a node in the imperial machine. And the people living there? They were now caught in a global tug-of-war between sovereignty, commerce, and control. Now that Zanzibar's strategic value is clear, let's talk about control, and what happens when that control is challenged. In theory, a protectorate allows local rulers to maintain authority. In practice, it's more like putting a puppet on a throne and expecting him to dance when you pull the strings. Enter Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini. Hamad was the kind of leader the British loved: compliant, cooperative, and predictable. He aligned neatly with British imperial interests. As long as he kept trade flowing and didn't rock the boat, Britain was happy to let him wear the crown while they pulled the levers of real power from behind the scenes. But on August 25, 1896, everything changed. Hamad died suddenly, suspiciously suddenly, and the moment he took his last breath, a power vacuum opened, and Khalid bin Bargash rushed in to fill it. Khalid wasn't Britain's pick. In fact, they had explicitly warned him not to try anything. But the moment Hamad died, Khalid marched into the palace, declared himself sultan, and locked the doors behind him. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Not in the imperial playbook. Under British Protectorate Protocol, any new sultan needed British approval, essentially a stamp of permission from the empire. And Khalid? He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He acted. To Britain, this was not just a breach of etiquette, it was a threat to their system of indirect rule. Because if a local leader could seize power without their say-so, the illusion of control would shatter. And the illusion, more than anything, was what kept the empire running smoothly. So, what did Britain want instead? They wanted a compliant figurehead, someone they could influence, steer, or sideline at will. A leader who looked like he was in charge, but never really was. This wasn't just about one succession crisis. It was about the machinery of empire, how centralized systems react when their carefully arranged facade is threatened, and how far they'll go to restore the illusion. So, what happens when a puppet refuses to dance? You get the shortest war in history. After seizing the palace, Khalid bin Bargash wasn't just defying tradition, he was staring down an empire. And he knew it. So, he prepared. Khalid fortified the palace with nearly 2,800 troops and even positioned a royal yacht, as if naval resistance might be possible. It was bold, it was defiant, and it was doomed. Because the British didn't just want to remove him, they wanted to make an example of him. They issued an ultimatum: vacate the palace by 9 in the morning on August 27th, or face the consequences. And to make sure the message landed with clarity, they moved warships into position, strategically, visibly, undeniably. When the deadline passed at 9 o'clock sharp, the British didn't hesitate. By 9:02, they opened fire, and by 9:40, the palace lay in ruins. 38 minutes. That was all it took. Khalid? He escaped through a back door and fled to the German consulate, where he was granted asylum. But let's not pretend this was a war in the traditional sense. This wasn't a battle between equals. This was a performance, an exercise in imperial theater. The sheer imbalance of power, British warships versus palace guards, was staggering. It was never about military necessity. It was about sending a message. A message to Zanzibar, a message to the region, a message to the world. This is what happens when the empire is defied. And in 38 minutes, the curtain fell. Now let's zoom out, because this wasn't just about Zanzibar. It was about the machinery behind the empire, the cold, calculated system that turned islands, sultans, and warships into moving parts of a larger economic engine. Zanzibar's geographic location made it a crown jewel. Right at the heart of Indian Ocean trade routes, it was a perfect choke point for controlling goods flowing between Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Whoever held Zanzibar didn't just hold land, they held leverage. And for the British Empire, predictability was everything. They didn't want chaos. They didn't want drama. They wanted smooth, uninterrupted trade. That's why their system relied so heavily on centralized logic. Everything, from treaties to puppet sultans, was designed to maintain order, protect commercial continuity, and minimize surprises. Which brings us back to that 38-minute war. It wasn't just a military maneuver. It was an economic deterrent. Think of it like a warning light on a factory line. If a local leader dared to disrupt the flow, bam, shut it down fast, show everyone what happens, and keep the system running. That's why the British didn't install direct rule in Zanzibar. Instead, they propped up puppet governance, a local face with imperial strings. This kept things looking native on the surface while hollowing out real autonomy beneath it. But that comes with a cost, because while the empire maintained stability, it did so by silencing local voices, by reducing complex societies into parts of a machine, and by making sure that economic order always trumped self-determination. The empire didn't just conquer territory, it organized it. And Zanzibar? It became a case study in how indirect rule, economic logic, and fast, symbolic violence could hold an entire system in place. So, what came next? With Khalid out of the picture and the palace reduced to rubble, the British moved quickly to restore the image of control. They didn't just rebuild a structure, they rebuilt the illusion of legitimacy. They installed Sultan Hamad bin Mohammed, a man far more willing to toe the British line. He didn't seize power, he was given it. Quietly, compliantly, and with a handshake from the empire. And Khalid? He remained holed up in the German consulate until he was smuggled out by ship. He lived in exile, eventually dying in East Africa, far from the palace he briefly ruled. But here's the deeper point. This wasn't just about replacing one man with another. This was imperial theater. The British knew that to maintain long-term influence, they didn't just need dominance. They needed symbols of dominance. They needed moments, stories, and spectacles that would echo across the colonies. Blowing up a palace in 38 minutes? That wasn't just efficiency. That was messaging. It told the world, defiance will be brief, resistance will be crushed, and control will be swift. Even the rebuilding process became part of the story. The palace ruins were cleared. The loyal sultan ruled under British protection. Trade resumed. And to the casual observer, it looked like everything was back to normal. But underneath that surface was the deep hum of imperial suppression, quiet, constant, and calculated. This is what empires do best. They turn chaos into cautionary tales. They turn local leaders into loyal clients. And they turn short wars into long-lasting warnings. So now we pause, and we ask the question that really matters. What can a 38-minute war actually teach us? Because on the surface, it's almost laughable. A palace shelled, a yacht sunk, and a would-be sultan gone in the time it takes to finish a cup of coffee. But underneath that brevity lies something much deeper. This was never just about Zanzibar. It was about how power performs itself. You see, empires don't always rely on constant violence. They rely on the threat of violence, on showing just enough force, in just the right moment, to ensure the next challenger thinks twice. It's not the war that matters most. It's the message the war sends. And what message did this send? It told the world that Britain would not tolerate uncertainty, that any disruption to their carefully managed order, no matter how small, no matter how symbolic, would be met with overwhelming, immediate force. The goal wasn't just to win. It was to demonstrate, in full theatrical clarity, that resistance was futile. This is how centralized systems defend themselves. They rely on performance, on spectacle, on suppressing even the possibility of alternatives. Because when systems are built on illusion, on the idea that everything is under control, the greatest threat is unpredictability. And when Khalid took that palace, he didn't just break protocol. He broke the script. So the empire wrote a new one. Fast, loud, and unforgettable. And in doing so, they reminded everyone watching that their version of order, however coercive, however artificial, was the only one allowed to exist. As we close, let's step back one last time and look at what this strange, brief war really reveals. The Anglo-Zanzibar War wasn't about strategy or military might. It was about maintaining the illusion of legitimacy, an illusion that served the empire far more than any cannon ever could. Britain didn't conquer Zanzibar with troops. They conquered it with rules, with rituals, with paperwork signed in London and ultimatums delivered at dawn. They built a system that looked like cooperation on the surface, but underneath, it was held together by coercion and control. This is how centralized empires function. They create systems that reward obedience and punish unpredictability. They install figureheads, not leaders. They export stability, but it's stability at the cost of sovereignty, culture, and voice. And yet, the illusion works. To the outside world, Zanzibar remained independent. The Sultan still wore a crown, but every decision that mattered had already been made elsewhere. This kind of system doesn't just belong to history books. It echoes into the present, into how institutions operate, into how power is displayed, into how legitimacy is constructed, and who decides what legitimate even means. Because when systems are centralized, when incentives are warped by power instead of principle, we get structures that value order over justice and performance over truth. So, the next time someone says a war was short, remember this: duration doesn't equal importance. Sometimes, it only takes 38 minutes to expose an entire empire's playbook. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Truth Behind History. And if you want to hear this story on the go, check out the podcast version, links in the description. For more deep dives into history's overlooked truths, explore our other videos. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking beneath the surface.